Hello everybody, I'm InTheLittleWood, also known as Martyn. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another monthly update from the Hytale team. Yesterday's post basically focused on two topics, character customization and throwable objects. Just before we get into those, there is a quick reminder in the blog post about job positions being available at Hypixel Studios. So if that all interests you, just another sort of loudspeaker here to let you know that you could potentially work for the company. But anyway, let's crack on with the main meat of yesterday's vlog. Blog. So our last update regarding character creation was all the way back in February of last year, which if you haven't seen it, basically gave us our first glimpse of the character creation screen, which has likely undergone some changes based on what I'm about to show you today. There was a variety of hairstyles, a bunch of colours for it, loads of t-shirts, like ranging from pirate rags to martial artist outfits, and even just regular old hoodies. But yesterday's blog post showed us how we as the player can actually go ahead and add our own unique touch to any of these pieces of clothing using something called gradient mapping. This method sounds like a win-win for both the Hytale team as well as players, and here's why. So let's start with the Hypixel team. So previously, when they created an object that they wanted to have different hues, for example hair colours, they would have to go in and individually draw every alteration, export it, and instead of having one texture, they had upwards of 20, given this example, which from a development standpoint takes up 1, more storage space, and 2, lots of time. And then for the players, if they didn't really feel like any of the colours truly represented them or the look they were trying to go for, they would have to be savvy enough to load up a program like Photoshop or something similar, have a certain level of artistry to be able to draw some kind of character or object that would fit the Hytale style. But with this new system, everything is easier for everyone. They now only have to export one texture rather than 20 of them, because what they do is they draw a grayscale texture. So this is basically a black and white image with lots of light tones, lots of dark tones to give the clothing that kind of 3D depth and real look. Once they've created that, all they need to do then is apply some color to it. Now initially I had thought that this was going to be a 2-color selection system, but when I drew this gradient using the far left and far right colors, it actually didn't match up. So what I did was I color picked the bold pink in the center, had it land exactly halfway on my gradient, and voila, a perfect match. So it looks as though for this process, and at least for this piece of clothing in particular, we're going to be able to choose 3 colors for our gradient. Wonderful. And I think given the limited pixel count of the textures, I really can't see them allowing us to use any more than 3 colours, but I do think they will allow us to choose only 2 colours or even just the 1. If you still can't quite understand what's happening here, let me explain it for you. So the game is going to take the colour on the far left hand side of your gradient and apply that to any pixels in the texture that are pure black. The same goes again for the colour on the far right of your gradient, that will be applied to anything that is pure white. And then as you could probably guess, anything that falls in between there, say it's a colour that is exactly half black and half white, so it's a very central grey, that will go to, in this example, the hot pink. So on and so forth. If anybody like myself has ever used Photoshop, it's very similar, but not exactly the same, as a feature known as blending options. It's like that with a little extra spice. So hopefully that clears it up for a couple of people. Now what is really cool about this system as well is that it's not just one blanket colour or gradient for the entire texture. If we were to create our own clothing or characters or blocks, whatever it may be, using the Hytale model maker, there is apparently going to be a way to set which parts of the texture can and can't be manipulated. So in the example on the screen right now, they mentioned how the green pull strings and the accent lines are actually customizable while the rest of the trousers are not. Now, the next line in the blog post is what threw me off a little bit. So it says, what's more, the properties of the gradient file can be used to define different material types, from coarse fabrics to high contrast metallics and soft textures like hair. I don't really know what that means. If anybody watching this video knows for sure what that refers to, then please feel free to educate me. My best guess as of right now is to do with lighting, because as we all know, different objects reflect or don't reflect light in very different ways. It's nice to make that distinction, because imagine getting the same reflection off of an iron sword as you would a dusty old piece of leather. It's just not going to look right. And the only other thing I can come up with off the top of my head is maybe to do with how objects move, whether certain objects are going to be more rigid and then others can actually bend and actually be shaped by the character. Maybe they're affected by the wind whilst others aren't. I'm just guessing here. But ultimately, this system seems great. It gives players more individual expression without needing fancy software, and the modding capabilities are going to be unreal. Like, a big question I've got on this topic for modders is, are there going to be any further capabilities with textures and gradient mapping than what we've seen already? Is the Hytale engine advanced enough to do on-the-fly texture swapping with a simple command or a trigger? Like, I'm imagining a boss fight against some giant foe, and whenever you take off, say, 25% of its health, 50% of its health, and then it's got its final little bit of slither of health, itself, whether it can actually change physical appearance to show enrage or fear or whatever else. Now obviously when I say that, I was thinking more of textures, like really hard visible differences, but imagine even just having something as cool as a sword where the color gradient is constantly changing. It's just like flowing and like it looks like it's alive, like a rainbow sword or something. It could really blow the game wide open if there are a ton of different triggers that can actually affect color gradients. Like imagine slaying enough mobs and eventually over time your sword gets bloodstained. Or I guess if you're killing outlanders, then maybe they'll just bleed green and it'll be green instead. Maybe you could have some armor that changes color based on the time of day, or maybe even changes to suit the biome that you're currently in to help you camouflage. Oh, I want this game right now, please! Anyway, I theorized enough. Let's move on with the blog and start talking about throwing objects. Let's just take 3 seconds though before we do to look at this very Sailor Moon Kawaii Desu lineup. And we're done. Right, throwing stuff. That's fun, isn't it? So in August of last year, we got a comedic look at throwing knives for the very first time in Hytale. That pigeon still haunts my nightmares. But there's been some tweaks made to the look, feel, and sound of projectiles since then. So let's take a look at our first clip. Now, as always, these things are a work in progress, and I completely appreciate that, but I do like to give my opinions in these videos about even the tiniest details in case they want that kind of feedback from the player perspective. So let's start off with the sound of the thrust. It's a little bit too beefy. I'm gonna be honest, it's a skinny little javelin pole arm type thing, and it doesn't catch that much of the wind when you swing it. I just don't think the audio really suits. Like, if you were to play that sound effect to me with no visuals, I would say that's either a sword or an axe or something in that kind of area, something with a much larger metal head. Say for example, I was to take the Trork slaying clip from the last progress update, which luckily didn't have any sword sound, so this is great. I'm gonna go ahead and overlay the sound of this spear, and let me know what you think. It's a pretty good fit, right? So there you go. I don't know if that's at all helpful, but that's just kind of where my head was at with that sound effect. Moving on, when the player is then bringing up the spear to the side of their head, there's this tension noise. Now that noise is basically to signify to the player, when you release the mouse button, that is going to launch something. And that sound works when you've got something like a bow and arrow, because that is the sound of the string pulling against the actual frame of the bow. But that's not what we've got here. I guess maybe you could say that that sound of tension is actually their armor kind of crunching together as they're pulling their arm backwards, but the spear looks completely stationary in the top corner of the screen, so it doesn't imply any movement from the character. But anyway, moving on from that one, and then we make our way to the final sound effect that I want to talk about, and that is the impact noise when it hits the hay blocks. I'm not entirely sure what that is. It almost sounds like a barking or like another sword swing. It's really like full on, even from like, you know, a medium distance, it's still quite audible. I think I was expecting more of a prominent thud and then kind of like the crunching sound that you hear when, you know, hay bales get impacted and they start to separate to make way for the object that's just pierced them. To be fair though, I can imagine that a louder sound effect like this being much more useful for the player when they're in a really busy situation, when there are tons of mobs around them, there's clashing, there's clanging, there's grunts, there's growls, there's other players shouting stuff at you, and basically you need something that can get over the top of all that noise to be a confirmation that your hit has landed. And with all of that said, it doesn't really matter that much because the audio panning in this game sounds really, really good. Like, bravo on the stereo work there. Literally, when you've got the spear to the right side of your head, you can hear the tension is only on that side of you. The wind slap or whip, whatever you want to call it, when you release the spear sounds absolutely sublime, and like, you almost feel like you can feel the breeze coming off of it. It's weird. And then without a doubt, I love the natural reverberation on the sound when it actually hits the target. Like, you can genuinely tell when it hits that far target, it sounds a little bit harder in the left ear because it sounds as though the sound has traveled out, hit a wall, and is already returning back to you, whereas on the right hand side, you can tell, even without looking, that there's going to be much more open space and the continued forest that way. So there you go, that is my hot take on the audio demos from this blog post, and I really hope people don't think that I'm nitpicking when I break down things like this, you know, singular sounds and things like that. It all comes from a place of me wanting to give Hytale's team really positive feedback, something constructive, explain exactly why I felt something was jarring, rather than just going, I don't like it. Because I have such a huge admiration for them developing the game from both a player perspective and also from a developer side as well. I'd like to think that now, this far in my career, I have a better understanding of the technical theoretical limits and capabilities of certain things, so I try to give advice that I think is applicable and actually, like, you know, manageable. Anyway, moving on. This clip is followed up with a little footnote saying how some objects, like the spear, can actually collide and wedge into other objects. Makes sense. But others can bounce off of them. I guess just before we start talking about bouncing objects, do you think we'll be able to retrieve spears? Because it really seems to be a coin toss as to whether video games will let you actually retrieve your ammunition for ranged weaponry or not. Usually I like the rule of if it's stuck in an enemy and they're dead, let it despawn with them. If I miss them and it hit a wall, let me nab it back. Anyways, back to the rock. So in this first demonstration or two, we can see a single impact and then a single landing point where there's no bouncers afterwards. If anything, they do seem to touch the ground and then almost immediately stop in place, like they kind of defy gravity for a moment. But again, this could be early days for this system. The second throw goes a very impressive, I want to say like 15 blocks high. It looks ridiculously tall. It hits the tree, it falls down, and then actually causes the tall grass to react to it, which is a really nice touch. Then it bounces down to another layer, but then again stops in that weird anti-gravity setup. And if you notice, it does actually flip orientation just before we look away. And if I'm looking at it correctly from this angle, it seems to be matching the finishing point that the other two objects had when they were thrown. So I think at the moment, they're playing around with whether objects should face the same compass direction once they go static. And then last but not least, we have got a two-wall collision, so it bounces off the tree, off the ice, and then onto the ground. Again, completely loses momentum when it hits the floor and does that quick adjustment to be stood upright. I'm really excited about the gameplay implementations of something like this. You're going to be able to throw some of these objects, hopefully, to be able to distract enemies. Like, imagine coming to a camp of Trorks, or God forbid the Quebecs go crazy and want to kill all humans. You can basically go up to a pack of them, maybe throw a rock, 3 of them wander off and go, "What was that? What was that? That was a weird noise." And then you can slay the other 2 when they're not looking, and they'll turn around only because they've heard the thud of the bodies crashing into the earth. And breathe. A little bit dark for a second there. And not only can we use throwing objects for tactical gain, we can also use it for a light bit of trolling. Because that's right, everybody, this segment today is sponsored by poop. Yup, the last clip today sees us approaching a mama and a baby, and one of them has laid an absolutely massive Mr. Whippy. The player picks it up, turns the bud a cat, and gives him a faceful. Just some little notes before he throws the poo. You can actually see little flies animating, flying around the poop, and also some slightly transparent stink waves that are coming up from the object in your hand. And most importantly, it does damage. It did around about 5% of Buddha's base health. So who's going to be the first person to do a poop-only run of Hytale? Yeah, probably me. Probably. And that's it. We're all done with May's progress report. Finito. And this one actually couldn't have come at a better time because it talks about character customization, modeling, texturing, and that is actually what I've been doing on live stream recently. I've been learning how to 3D model in a program called Model Bench, and then basically exporting that into Minimator to do some poses, and I've been doing both Hytale stuff and also Minecraft Dungeon. And then what you can see on the screen right now is my personal creation. I used a pre-existing pack which had a load of blocks and textures inside of it, but everything you see there that is Quebec related is all this guy. I drew the texture based on reference images that I got off the website. I did the modeling slowly but surely, and also figured out how to make the leaf bend as well, which I was very proud of. So if you want to see how I do that, ask any questions if you're starting out for yourselves, then come on over to twitch.tv/InTheLittleWood, and I'm going to pass it off to you dudes. What has been your favourite part about this month regarding Hytale? Have you got any theories? Have you got anything that you noticed that I didn't? Let me know in the comment section below. I love geeking out about this stuff with you all. Take it easy, wash your hands, you dirty buggers, and I'll see you all in a few weeks, I guess. Ta-ra!